Let's move on to the BBC. It's one of our main stories today, all over the front of the Telegraph today. The Culture Secretary was on Talk Today, our breakfast show here on TalkTV this morning, talking about the fact that she's called Ofcom in to monitor the BBC's websites and its media channels far more closely amid charges that left-wing bias at the state broadcaster is out of control. Let's have a look at Lucy.
Public trust in one of our public institutions is really, really important. And you're right to say that some people think it's biased and they're frustrated with the complaints process. And that's why today we're publishing the midterm review. And what that will do will enhance the impartiality of the BBC and provide more independent scrutiny of the complaints system.
I mean, Benedict, the thing is here, the actual licence fee itself won't come under review until, I think, 2027 is the next time something can be tabled on that. But this midterm review is designed to sort of say to the BBC, look, people aren't happy with what you're doing. And apparently 2 in 5 complaints being made against the BBC now are for matters of bias.
I mean, the key thing there is that because it's a big story and we're all talking about it, people notice when there's bias at the BBC. It's not like there's some sort of underhand propaganda thing going on where people are being brainwashed. People can see what's going on. They recognise that they're not stupid. For me, therefore, the bias itself is not so much the issue. It's the licence fee and the fact that actually other broadcasters are potentially locked out of a system. You can't access other broadcasters, unless you pay the Danegeld to the BBC. That, I think, is the issue. I have no qualms. I understand that human beings have biases, they have prejudices. Even the most professional will sometimes let that slip through. I'd rather know, actually, what my broadcasters at the BBC think.
Transparent.
I'd rather know what they think, rather than them pretend to be above everybody else. And I'd like it to be a fair system where everybody has got the same kind of access, and you don't have to pay to access other people. The BBC, you don't have to pay them to do that.
But it's very important, though. I mean, I wrote an article once and got a lot of response from some very senior people at the BBC. I said, all these people at the BBC moaning about Brexit, how did this happen? Well, if the BBC reporters and presenters were allowed to be prejudiced and biased, frankly, like the rest of the media, then maybe the BBC could have campaigned against Brexit and you would have won your case. However, it is important that the BBC remains independent because we don't pay for other media outlets. We're about to pay nearly 170 quid a year for the BBC, and we don't pay for prejudice.
Yeah, and I think, but there are also questions that need to be asked about how the BBC allocates its funds that it does actually get. You know, you ask, is 170 quid worth it? Potentially, depending on what it decides to put it could be worth it, but very often people don't feel that they're getting value for money. I don't think that's necessarily because of BBC bias. I think it's because the BBC allocates certain things over others. You know, actually, their news output has fallen in terms of its quality because that's often where the cuts fall first. Whereas, you know, the more commercial, the stuff that could be more commercially viable, the entertainment, the stuff that should be allowed to go out and compete with the Netflixes of this world, no, that gets ring-fenced. That gets the special stuff.
Of course
and actually, the BBC, I think, has a duty to the country for high culture as well as low culture, as well as news and current affairs. It does have a duty to uphold these things, and very often it treats itself as if actually it can just decide it can do what it wants.
Well, it does decide what it does itself, and it needs to be stopped from that. But your texts and tweets have been coming in after we asked, as the government cracks down on left-wing BBC bias, is the TV licence fee worth nearly £170 a year? James says the licence fee is an iniquitous tax that should be abolished. Stuart says, it's not for me anymore. I won't pay it until they sack Gary Lineker.
And Susan says, BBC bias is not just what they say, but the things they don't say and the issues they don't cover. Couldn't agree more.
Well said.